Thank you very much for this great opportunity to present a very small part of my PhD project. Before talking about this small part, I just would like to provide a small background about it. So when you get hospitalized, most of the care that you will receive will be coming from nurses. So around 80% of the care that you will receive is coming from nurses. This is why we are interested to know what is the relationship between nurse staffing and patients' outcomes, because nurses then have a huge impact or a large impact on patient safety. The issue in the current literature is that the majority of the studies use aggregated data. So either data for the whole hospital or data over one full year. And yes, so most of the time we miss this detailed information, and at the end we still do not know what is this clear relationship between nurse staffing and patient's outcome. And this is why we decided to first run a quite detailed descriptive analysis. So we use one Swiss university hospital in Switzerland, and we had like two different data sets that we merged. And we calculated every 30 minutes how many nurses, how many patients were present for 3 full years. And at the end, by doing this detailed data, we end up with more than 50 million observations. And we have like 70 units and more than 4,000 nurses and more than 100,000 patients. I will only focus today about patients turnover. Patients turnover are the movement of the patients inside of the hospital. And why is it so important is that most of the studies are not taking this information into account when we talk about nurse staffing and the workload that it's giving to the nurses. Because when a patient is moving, it's more administrative work for nurses. They end up with more nurses on the unit. And this is quite important to know how those patients are moving. And also a last important information is, even if we have the amount of patients on the unit which stay constant, it might not be that there was no movement. It's just because the amount of patients going out and coming in are the same. But at the end, nurses need to take care of those movements. So here is just a small pictures. Yes. So what we consider as admission is every patient coming from another hospital or from home, and they are coming to our hospital of interest. Everything called discharge is going out of the hospital. So it can be to another hospital or home. And what we are calling transfers in or out are within the same hospital. So it's movement between units or between departments. So here it's an example of a data just for one single patient. So what we see here is we have the dates, the time, department, and the unit associated. Here what we can see is that the first date when the patient is coming to the hospital is on the 26th of June, and it was around 7 in the evening. And then we see here he go out on 23rd of July at 3 p.m. And all in between is movement of the patients inside the hospital. So as you can see, one patient can move a lot. So like I said, this is admission, this is discharge. It's quite easy to extract. The challenge is then, how do we know the transfer inside? I took here an example for this unit. The challenge here is that this patient is coming to this unit. So this will be considered for this unit point of view as a transfer in. And the last one, it will be a transfer out. But here in between, you have several times the same units. It doesn't mean that it's wrong data. It might be, but it's more because movements in between rooms or changing beds are not recorded here. But it's recorded that he's moving, but it's always the same units. So what we need to take into account is how can we ignore those in between units. And here I created a new column called move based on this unit point of view. So the first one was not an admission for this unit. And this one, I call it as transfer out, and here it's called transfer in, and then in, and out. And what I need is to delete those in between transfer in. So I use one dplyr or two dplyr functions, which are the lead function and the lag functions. So what it allows you is the lead is what is the next variable. So if we take this one, the next one is transfer out. So for this column, I will have transfer out. And then I do the same here. The next one, it will be a transfer out. It's reported here. And then I did the same for what was the movement before. And here, before, it was nothing. So it's reported as an NA. I take the second one, the before, it was not an admission, and it's reported here. So now I have these two new columns, and now I can filter which one from our units of interest are proper transfer in or transfer out, based on those two new columns created. So here is just the code, how I make the selection. So we will code everything as a transfer in when, of course, the movement, if I go back here, when we have here as an output transfer in. But we need to exclude everything that was already before a transfer in or an admission, because it's not a proper movement of the patient. So if we go back here, or perhaps here, so for this one, it's a proper transfer in, because what was before was not admission or transfer in. This one, before it was transfer in, so this one will be ignored. And then we can do it so on for every transfer in, and I create another one for transfer out, the same. When can we call it as a proper transfer out is when we have transfer out in combination when before we had already transfer in or admission. And by doing this, we end up with this table where we can count the number of transfer in and number of transfer out. And here we can see now it's counted properly. This one was a proper transfer in, and this one was the only one for the transfer out. At the end, what we did is for the 3 years of data and the 70 units, we calculated every 30 minutes the amount of patients and the amount of admission, discharge, transfer in, and transfer out. And at the end, we could do those graphs. So here it's only for 1 unit. You have on this axis the time, so it's going from midnight up to 11:30 at night. And here you have percentages, because all units have different sizes. We divided the amount of transfer or admission by the total amount of patients present. And everything on your right side is patients coming to the unit. So it's admission or transfer in, and everything on the left side is patients going out. So it's discharge or transfer out. And it was split by weekdays and weekends. And what we see, for example, is we have less movement during weekends. And what we can do is detect when, during the day, we have more movements. So for example, here we have at 10 a.m. the highest amount of patients going out. We have another example. So here, in comparison to this one, we have much more transfers instead of admission and discharge. And again, here we have more often peaks during the day. So we have one at 11 a.m. and one at 2 p.m. And here again, what we can see is that the weekend, we still have a high amount of patients turnover. So as a conclusion, this was really like a small part of this descriptive analysis. And the goal for us was to really go into details how these patients, nurses, and patients turnover are varying over time. Because our goal was to select variables that are depending on time. And now what we are currently doing is developing a nurse staffing model, and the next step is a mortality model. So which variables has an effect on the patient's outcome if he will die or not, and what variables is varying over time. Is there any specific days where you are more likely to die because you were admitted, I don't know, on a Sunday, or something like this. So this is why we really conduct this very first detailed analysis. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Sarah? Thank you, Sarah, for your presentation.
Hi, great talk. I was just wondering, with your data collection, was it a manual paper-based entry done by the nurses, or was it some kind of automation, barcode, RFID chip kind of thing?
It's a mix. So like I said, we have two different data sources. One was filled by nurses. So it's a system that every nurse needs to fill up at the end of every shift. What they do, what they did to which patients, in which unit they work, and everything. So it's quite detailed. And the other one is like the administrative data. So it's detailed information about the patients.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Other questions? I see none. Oh, yes.
Hi, thank you. Regarding the mortality models that you mentioned that you are working on, do you plan to take into account the discharge or not? So you are aware of the literature that...
Yes.
Thank you.
So we are currently already implemented all those detailed variables. And what is interesting is depending on which unit you are looking, sometimes it's more discharge or admission or transfer which has more impact on the model. So for us, this is why it was interesting to look, because like you can see here, it's really changing depending on which unit you are looking at. And then, of course, depending on this descriptive one, you have different impact for the predictive model.
Yes, just if you're looking at the mortality models, you should take into account that there is a competing risk with discharge. I mean, that's the latest results in the field, just as a friendly note if you want to take into account from the literature.
Can you just
So
repeat?
you will have competing risks models for discharge and...
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Because you cannot see it here.
Yes, yes, sure.
Any other hand I may be missing? Okay, well, thank you very much.